For those times when you need a function that may take a varying number of arguments, C++ provides variadic functions. Here I have a working copy of variadic.cpp from Chapter 2 of the exercise files. And you notice here on line 4, the C standard arg header provides the macros needed to support the variadic arguments. So this file shows two examples of variadic functions, and let's take a look at the first one. The first one here is called average. It returns a double, and it takes an integer, which is the count of the number of values that are being averaged, and then it takes a variable number of arguments. Those arguments are doubles, which will be averaged. So you notice that I have a comment that explains all of this because it's not obvious from the function signature that ... means that this function takes a variable number of arguments. So there's a macro called va_list, which declares the list of arguments that appear after that first argument. And then there's a va_start macro, which points at the va_list variable and the count variable. So the count variable here, it declares where the start of the variable argument list begins. And so what you put here is the last argument that's not one of the variable list. So the last one that's explicitly declared, in this case it's the count one, it's also the first one, that's what you put there with va_start. And then in this loop, I have this va_arg macro, which grabs the next variable from the list, and it also declares its type here. And then va_end, you have to call that when you're done, or it can create problems later on. So here's another example. This is the message example, and this works just like printf does. In fact, this is how printf works. And so it works a little bit differently. We're not grabbing each of the individual values from the list. Rather, we're passing the whole list to a function called vfprintf, which is in the standard library. And so you notice it's declared in the same way with the 3 dots to indicate the variable argument list. And we have va_list, again, the macro from the standard arg library. And we have va_start that tells us where that list begins right after the fmt, the format argument. But now this part is different. We're actually passing this AP, which is a pointer to the variable argument list, and our format, we're passing it to this standard library function vfprintf, which will print the message to standard out. And of course, we also call va_end, also a macro in that standard argument library. So this allows us to do this. We use message just as if we were using printf. And when I build and run this, you'll see our result here. And we're able to pass a format string just like for printf, and the result of our average function returns a double, so this %lf will print out a double. And then we're calling average, and you notice the first argument is not part of the variable argument list. It's the number of arguments that we're putting in the variable argument list. So we have 5 doubles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Plus we have this count at the beginning. And so then it'll take all of these numbers and it will return total divided by count, which is the average, and display it down here. So one note here, this vfprintf function, if you're using Microsoft Visual C++, you may get a warning that vfprintf is deprecated, and it'll recommend that you use a version with an _s after the name. Feel free to do that. The security enhancements that are in that _s version are worthwhile. They include additional type checks for parameterized values. Most modern C runtime libraries, including the Clang library that's used on this Mac, already have those features added to the standard version of vfprintf.